My name is Daniel Harris, and I'm 65 years old. I've spent the better part of my life building Harris Freight Logistics with my wife, Eliana Flores. For 40 years, we built everything from scratch, a single truck, long hours, shared dreams. And then one day, she was gone. This story isn't about grief, though. That's how it began. It's about what happens when loyalty dies before love does. 1 week after I buried Eliana, my son Ryan and his wife Brenda asked to meet about the future. I thought they meant family matters, maybe the house, the memorial fund. Instead, they asked to meet at the company's boardroom. That was my first warning. The boardroom wasn't just a room. It was a monument. Walnut walls, a polished table that had outlasted recessions, and the logo Eliana designed herself, the letters HFL carved into brass and mounted against glass. When they walked in, Brenda led the way, her heels clicking across the marble floor. She wore confidence like armor hair pinned back sharp as a blade. Ryan followed half a step behind, eyes down, jaw tight. He looked uncomfortable, but he didn't speak. Brenda opened her laptop before I even sat down. Daniel, she began, smiling like a banker who'd already seen your balance sheet. I think we all agree it's time to discuss the company's direction. The market is unstable, investors are nervous, and with Eliana's passing, people need to see leadership, strong leadership. I didn't say anything. I let her talk. She glanced at Ryan and continued. Ryan has been COO for 10 years. He knows the business better than anyone. The responsible next step would be a full transition today. You can retain an honorary title, of course, but the operational authority should pass to him. She said it cleanly, like she was ordering a drink. My son looked away. I folded my hands on the table. You want me to hand over the company a week after your mother's funeral? Brenda gave a practiced sigh. Daniel, I understand this is emotional, but grief doesn't stop the market. If we hesitate now, competitors will sense weakness. Weakness. She said it like a diagnosis. I pressed the intercom. Please send in Mr. Ishikawa, I said. A moment later, Kenji Ishikawa, our corporate attorney for over 2 decades, stepped into the room. He was calm, precise, and silent, the kind of man who understood the value of presence. He nodded to me, set down his briefcase, and stood behind my chair. Brenda's expression tightened. I wasn't aware this was a legal matter. It wasn't, I said evenly. You made it one. The temperature in the room dropped a few degrees. Kenji is here, I continued, because this isn't a family chat. It's business. And he attends all important business meetings. Ryan shifted in his chair. Dad, Brenda didn't mean. Yes, I did. Brenda cut him off. Let's not pretend this is personal. The company needs structure. Carol? She stopped herself, catching the name. I mean, Eliana would have wanted continuity. I felt something inside me tighten. Eliana's name from Brenda's mouth sounded like strategy. Continuity, I said quietly. You think your mother would have wanted me to hand over the company to someone who can't even let me finish burying her? Ryan flinched. Brenda didn't. I think she would have wanted stability, she replied. And frankly, Daniel, people are talking. They say you're distracted, tired. Tired, I repeated. That's one word for losing the person who built your life beside you. She smiled, a flash of pity so false it could cut glass. You've worked hard. You deserve rest. Let Ryan lead now. Her tone was soft. Her words were not. I took a slow breath. Brenda, I said, do you know how this company started? She tilted her head. I assume you had help from investors? I almost laughed. No. It started with 1 truck, a second mortgage, and Eliana keeping the books on our kitchen table. We hauled frozen produce to supermarkets at 2 in the morning because no one else would. Every mile we drove, we built this place 1 tire mark at a time. There were no investors, just sweat. Ryan looked down. He knew that story. He had heard it since childhood. Brenda clearly hadn't cared to. Why the rush, I asked her. Her answer came too quickly. Because hesitation kills companies. I leaned back watching her. Or maybe it exposes motives. Her smile faltered. I stood, palms on the table. Here's what will happen. I remain CEO and chairman. Ryan remains COO. Any changes will be made when I decide, not when I'm threatened into it. Brenda's face hardened. You can't stop the board. I met her eyes. I don't need to. I own 51% of the voting shares. I am the board. The silence after that was thick enough to breathe in. Ryan tried to speak, but Brenda grabbed his wrist and stood abruptly. "You're making a mistake," she said. "You'll regret it." "I already regret letting you into this family," I replied. Her expression froze, then cracked just slightly before she turned and walked out, dragging Ryan behind her. The echo of her heels faded down the hallway until only the hum of the air conditioning remained. I sat down again. My hands were steady. My pulse wasn't. Kenji closed his briefcase. "You want me to start looking?" "Yes," I said. "Anything Ryan's approved without my signature. New consultants, vendors, payments, transfers. Keep it quiet." He nodded, discreetly then. "Always." When he left, I stayed in that empty room for a long time, listening to the silence. I could almost hear Eliana's voice, calm, logical, with that faint laugh she used when she knew she was right. "Never fight them angry Danny," she used to say. "Fight them smart." So that's what I planned to do. That night I drove past the warehouse yard headlights glinting off the chrome trailers and realized something that made my grief shift shape again. Losing Eliana had broken my heart, but this was trying to steal her legacy, and that I would not allow. The war had already begun. 2 days after that disastrous meeting, I was back in my office at Harris Freight Logistics. The sun hadn't even cleared the skyline when I saw Kenji Ishikawa waiting outside my door. He looked the same as always, pressed gray suit briefcase, polished enough to catch the light, but his eyes told me he'd found something. He didn't waste time. "Daniel," he said quietly, closing the door behind him. "You were right to ask. I started with vendor accounts under 50,000, and I found one that doesn't exist." I leaned back in my chair. "Doesn't exist?" He opened his folder and slid a document across the desk. At the top, B&R Consulting LLC, registered in Delaware. I stared at the name for a moment. B&R. Kenji nodded. "Brenda and Ryan. It's as bold as it is careless." The room seemed to tilt slightly, though I hadn't moved. He continued, his tone clinical. "For the past 22 months, B&R Consulting has been invoicing your company every month for logistical analysis, market forecasting, and other vague services. The amounts are always just under the threshold that requires your direct signature between 40 and 48,000. My jaw tightened. Ryan could approve those himself. "Exactly," Kenji said. "He signed every one of them." He flipped to the next page, a spreadsheet of transactions. Each entry was a blade. March, April, May, June. Every month, money flowing quietly out of Harris Freight and into B&R Consulting. I asked the question slowly, already afraid of the answer. "How much in total?" Kenji took a breath. $812,450. I felt my stomach drop. The number hung in the air like smoke. For a moment, I couldn't speak. I stared at the figures until they blurred. I saw Eliana's handwriting in my mind, the careful way she'd sign every check in the early days, initials, small but steady. She used to say, "Every dollar we earn is a mile on the road. Don't lose sight of where it came from." And now, more than 800,000 miles gone. I rubbed my eyes and forced my voice steady. "Where did it go?" Kenji's expression didn't change, but his eyes darkened. I traced 2 large transfers. One was a down payment on a property in Aspen 5-bedroom chalet purchased under Brenda Peterson's name. The other, a full payment for a 2023 Porsche 911. Also, Brenda. I laughed. Not out of humor, more like disbelief forced through exhaustion. Aspen, a Porsche. They didn't even bother to hide it. Kenji closed the folder. People like that rarely do. They assume no one's watching. I leaned forward, elbows on the desk, and looked out the window at the skyline that Eliana and I had fought decades to rise into. While I was at the hospital with my wife, I said quietly they were siphoning money from the company she built. Kenji didn't answer. He didn't have to. I stood and walked to the photo wall, the one Eliana curated herself. Each frame told a story: the first truck, our first office, our first employee barbecue. Ryan at 16 helping wash the rigs, grinning with a garden hose in his hand. I stared at that photo, trying to find the boy who used to bring his mother coffee during night shifts. The boy who once said, "Mom, I want to build something like you and Dad." I couldn't find him. All I saw was the man who'd signed those invoices. "Kenji," I said at last, "I want everything." Every document, every bank record, every name tied to this. If there's an email, print it. If there's a signature, highlight it. And keep digging." He nodded. "You'll have the full audit by Monday." When he left, the silence pressed in like a heavy coat. I walked to the window and watched the city below delivery trucks weaving through morning traffic, the same rhythm of business Eliana and I had built. And for the first time, I felt something colder than grief. Resolve. They thought they were clever. They thought the old man wouldn't notice. They thought Eliana's death left me too broken to see the truth. They forgot who taught me how to fight. That night, I couldn't bring myself to sleep in our bed. I stayed in the home office instead, the faint scent of Eliana's perfume still clinging to the curtains. I made coffee that tasted like metal and stared at the framed note she'd left taped to my monitor months before she passed. It read, "Guard what we built, Danny. The wolves always come when the lights go out." She had seen this coming. My mind replayed her last months, how she'd asked Kenji to stop by the house privately, how she'd spent nights reading old contracts under a lamp, even when she was too weak to stand long. I thought she was reminiscing. I didn't realize she was preparing. The next morning, I called Maria Sanchez, Eliana's private nurse. She was one of the few people Eliana trusted completely. When she answered, her voice cracked. "Mr. Harris, are you holding up okay?" "As much as anyone can," I said softly. "Maria, I need to ask you something." Before she passed, did Eliana seem worried about the company or Ryan or Brenda? There was a pause. Then a slow exhale. "Yes. She didn't want to trouble you, but she asked a lot of questions. About documents. About the safe deposit box at First National. She said, 'If anything happens, Maria, he'll need this key.' I thought she meant her jewelry." My heartbeat quickened. "A key." "Yes, sir. Small silver. She made me promise not to give it to you unless Maria hesitated. Unless you were in real trouble." I closed my eyes. "Maria, I think that time has come." When she arrived later that day, she looked tired, older than I remembered. She took my hand in both of hers and pressed the small, tarnished key into my palm. "She said it would be your shield," Maria whispered, "and your sword." That night I sat alone in the dim light of my office, the key heavy in my hand. A small, ordinary object, but one Eliana had trusted more than anyone, including me, to keep safe. The betrayal I'd uncovered wasn't the end of the story. It was the first chapter of something larger, something she had seen long before I did. $800,000 was a symptom, but the disease ran deeper. Tomorrow I would go to the bank. I would open that box. And I had a feeling that what waited inside wasn't just numbers or papers. It was the truth Eliana had carried to her grave, and the plan she'd left for me to finish. The next morning, I drove downtown before the sun rose. The streets were still half asleep and a light fog curled above the asphalt. I parked across from First National Bank, sat in the car for a few minutes, and watched the automatic lights flicker on inside the marble building. That small silver key Eliana had left behind sat in my jacket pocket, cool and heavy like it carried its own heartbeat. When the bank opened, I walked straight to the manager's office. He recognized me. Our company had done business there for years and didn't ask many questions when I handed him the key. "This box hasn't been accessed in nearly a year, Mr. Harris," he said. "I know," I replied. "My wife opened it before she passed." He nodded sympathetically and led me down to the vault. The door sealed behind us with a deep mechanical sigh. He left me alone at a small desk with the steel box. For a long moment, I just looked at it. The lock was spotless, the key turned without resistance, and when the lid lifted, I saw Eliana's handwriting on the first thing inside a folded note marked, "Daniel, for when you're ready." My hands shook a little as I opened it. "If you're reading this, it means I was right about them." I froze. "You've always believed in giving people the benefit of the doubt even when they don't deserve it. That's one of the things I love about you, Danny, but it's also why you'll need evidence before you act. You taught me that fairness is power, but only when you have the truth on your side." Beneath the letter were two thick folders. Each was labeled in Eliana's handwriting. The first, B&R Consulting Shadow Accounts. The second, Trust Revision Legacy Clause. I felt my pulse climb as I flipped open the first folder. Inside were printed bank statements, wire confirmations, and copies of emails ones between Ryan and Brenda. She'd been forwarding company records to her private account. Notes in the margins, Eliana's neat handwriting tracked the patterns, dates, invoice numbers, even meeting minutes. At the bottom of the stack, a single sentence in red ink: "They're preparing to push you out. Protect the company, not the title." My throat tightened. Eliana had seen it all coming. She'd quietly gathered the evidence months before she died, while I was too focused on keeping her comfortable to notice the look in her eyes when she said, "Promise me you'll stay strong." I opened the second folder. This one looked different. Notarized papers, legal drafts, trust revisions. I skimmed until I saw it, her signature dated 3 months before her death. The Peterson Legacy Trust had been quietly amended into the Harris Family Trust, containing one crucial addition, something called a bloodline clause. It stated that the controlling shares of Harris Freight would pass only to direct blood descendants of both Daniel Harris and Eliana Flores. Not spouses, not stepchildren, only blood. It took a full minute for the weight of that to settle. Eliana had effectively ensured that if Brenda ever tried to seize control through Ryan or through a potential inheritance split, she'd fail. But the most chilling part was the small sticky note attached to the final page. "If you ever doubt why I did this, ask Kenji to show you the file I gave him under my maiden name." My mind raced. Eliana hadn't just left evidence. She'd left a strategy. I drove straight to Kenji Ishikawa's office. He looked surprised when I placed both folders on his desk. "She knew," I said quietly, "all of it." He flipped through the documents, nodding slowly. Eliana always played the long game. "There's more," I said. She mentioned another file, something under her maiden name. He stood across the room to a filing cabinet and pulled open the bottom drawer. After a few seconds, he retrieved a slim, sealed envelope. On the front, written in blue ink, "E. Flores for D.H." He handed it to me. "She told me to keep this sealed unless you came asking for it." I opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a photograph. The photo was old Eliana in her 30s, standing beside a young woman I didn't recognize, both of them smiling in front of a small community clinic. The paper was a notarized statement naming that woman Dr. Ann Wallace, Eliana's daughter. My hand froze over the page. For years, Eliana had told me she couldn't have children of her own. Ryan was my son from my first marriage, and she had always treated him as hers. But here in writing was the truth. Before we met, she'd had a daughter and given her up for adoption when she was 17. At the bottom of the document, one more line in Eliana's handwriting: "She's my blood, Daniel, and now she's yours too." I sat back in silence, trying to breathe. Kenji spoke softly. "Eliana didn't just protect the company from greed, she protected it for her real family." It took me a moment to find my voice. "Does this mean—" "Yes," he said. "Dr. Wallace is the rightful heir to Eliana's shares under the new trust. That clause ensures Brenda and Ryan can't touch a cent beyond what they already own." I stood up. My hands were trembling, not from anger this time, but from something that felt like justice waking up. "Kenji," I said, "we're going to call a board meeting. Quietly. You'll prepare the documentation. When we walk into that room, I want every fact on the table." He nodded. "I'll handle it." That evening, I sat in Eliana's study, surrounded by the soft glow of the old desk lamp she used to read by. The 2 folders lay open beside her framed photograph. Her eyes in that photo seemed to hold a secret smile, as if she knew I'd end up right here piecing together her plan. "You were 3 steps ahead," I whispered. "You always were." Outside, the city lights blinked on one by one. Somewhere out there, Brenda was probably celebrating early, still convinced she'd won. Ryan was likely telling himself he'd only borrowed the money, that it would all make sense in the end. But tomorrow, when the boardroom doors opened, they would see something they never expected: an old man who wasn't broken, and a ghost whose signature was stronger than their greed. Eliana hadn't just left me memories, she'd left me a map. And the next stop was revenge by paperwork, the kind that didn't just humiliate thieves, but erased their names from the story entirely. By Monday morning, the air at Harris Freight Logistics felt heavier than usual. Word travels fast in a family company, especially when tension hangs like smoke no one wants to mention. Brenda had been unusually quiet all weekend. No emails, no late-night calls to department heads. That kind of silence usually means one thing: someone's getting ready to make a move. They just didn't realize I was too. When I stepped out of the elevator, the first thing I saw was the photo of Eliana that hung by the lobby entrance, her in a bright red jacket laughing beside one of our first trucks. Beneath it was the company motto she had written herself: "Integrity delivers." That morning, the words felt like armor. At 9 sharp, I walked into the boardroom. Brenda and Ryan were already seated. Brenda had her hair tied back so tightly it looked painful, and Ryan was staring at his phone pretending to scroll. Around them sat the other 6 board members, 3 veterans who had been with us for decades, and 3 newer faces, mostly suggested by Brenda over the past 2 years. I stood at the head of the table. "Thank you for being here," I began. "Today's meeting isn't about quarterly performance. It's about the future of this company and the truth about what's been happening behind closed doors." Brenda gave a small, theatrical sigh. "Daniel, we agreed the last meeting was heated. Let's not turn this into another emotional discussion." "Oh, I promise it won't be emotional," I said. "It'll be factual." Her jaw tightened. I gestured to Kenji Ishikawa, who entered carrying 2 thick folders, the same ones I had found in Eliana's safety deposit box. He placed them neatly in front of each board member, then took a seat at the far end of the table. "Inside those folders," I continued, "you'll find records of payments made to a shell company called B&R Consulting, LLC. Over 22 months, it invoiced this business for more than $800,000 in vague consulting services. Every payment was approved by Ryan Harris without board authorization." A murmur spread across the room. Brenda spoke first, voice sharp and fast. "This is absurd. B&R Consulting provided legitimate services. We outsourced analytical work." I cut her off. "To a company registered in Delaware, owned by you and your husband under an address that leads to a post office box." The room went silent. Ryan's hand gripped his phone tighter. Brenda opened her mouth, but no words came out. I continued, my tone calm, deliberate. "You billed the company for work that never existed. You used that money to purchase a house in Aspen and a luxury car, both under your name. We have the receipts, we have the signatures, and we have every transaction time-stamped." Brenda's face lost its color. The head of operations, Marjorie Bennett, flipped through the pages and looked up at Brenda. "I've never seen these reports," she said flatly. "Not once. That's because they were never filed," Kenji added. "This was not oversight. It was fraud." Brenda slammed her hands on the table. "You can't prove intent." Kenji calmly slid another document toward her. "Actually, we can. These are emails from your private account forwarding company data to yourself. One even includes this sentence: 'Let's pull another 50 before the old man notices.'" Brenda froze. For a moment, no one spoke. Even Ryan looked stunned, his face pale. Then in a low voice I said, "You didn't just steal money. You stole from the legacy Eliana built. While she was in her hospital bed, you were wiring money into your own account. You didn't just betray me, you betrayed her." I let that sink in. The room was so quiet you could hear the faint hum of the air vents. Finally, I turned to the board. "I'm submitting 3 motions for immediate vote. 1, the termination of Ryan Harris as Chief Operating Officer, effective immediately on grounds of fiduciary misconduct. 2, the permanent removal of Brenda Peterson from all corporate accounts access and privileges. 3, referral of all evidence to state and federal authorities for investigation." One by one, hands went up. Even the members Brenda had brought in raised theirs. The motion passed unanimously. Brenda's chair screeched back as she stood. "You can't do this. You don't understand what you're doing." "Oh, I understand perfectly," I said. "You're being held accountable." Ryan stood too, voice shaking. "Dad, please. I made mistakes, but I didn't." "Stop," I said quietly. "You made choices. You knew where that money was going. You watched her spend it." He swallowed hard. His shoulders slumped. I gathered the papers in front of me and handed them to Kenji. "Send everything to the authorities. Today." Brenda's voice cracked. "You'll regret this." I met her eyes. "No, I'll remember it." After the meeting, the room emptied slowly, leaving only me and Kenji. He was quiet for a while before saying, "Eliana would be proud." I stared at the empty chair where Brenda had sat, her coffee cup still half full, lipstick mark on the rim. She's the reason this company survived every storm, I said. And she's the reason I had the strength to fight this one. Kenji gave a small nod. There's one more thing, Daniel. The trust clause. We should finalize it now that the board has acted. I exhaled. Do it. He pulled a final document from his briefcase, the revision Eliana had signed months before her death, the one with the bloodline clause. I watched as he filed it into the official record. From that moment on, Eliana's shares, her half of the company, could only pass to her direct descendants, which meant not to Ryan, not to Brenda, and certainly not to anyone who tried to profit from her absence. That evening, I drove home in silence. For the first time in months, the house didn't feel like a tomb. The light through the window fell across Eliana's piano, still covered in the lace cloth she loved. I sat down on the bench and touched one of the keys. The sound that came out was uneven but real. On the kitchen counter, my phone buzzed Kenji's message. Case files delivered, authorities notified, it's done. I poured myself a small glass of bourbon and stepped outside to the porch. The city skyline glowed in the distance, the same one Eliana and I had watched on summer nights when we were young and certain the future was ours. It still was just shaped differently now. Eliana's plan had worked. She had protected what we built even from beyond the grave. As I stood there, I whispered to the air, "You were right, Ellie. You always were." The wind carried through the trees like a soft laugh. Tomorrow the headlines would tell a simple story: a CEO uncovers a financial scandal in his own family. But for me, it was more than that. It was closure. It was justice. And in a world where greed often wins, that felt like a miracle worth remembering. The headlines came 3 weeks later. Executive couple charged in corporate fraud scheme. I didn't read the full article. I didn't need to. I'd already lived every line of it. The prosecutor's office called first. Then the financial crimes unit. Brenda and Ryan were charged with embezzlement, wire fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. The Aspen property was seized. The Porsche impounded. The rest of their accounts frozen pending restitution. When the agents asked if I wanted to press civil charges, I said yes, not out of spite, but because accountability isn't vengeance. It's clarity. Ryan pled guilty within a month. He said it was Brenda's idea that he'd only signed off out of trust. Brenda fought harder, hiring a high-profile lawyer and giving interviews about being betrayed by patriarchy. The court didn't buy it. The documents Eliana had left were airtight. Every invoice, every fake contract, every wire trail she had tied them all in a bow of truth. When the verdict came down, I didn't smile. I just sat in the back of the courtroom and let the weight of it all pass through me. The judge ordered restitution community service and barred them both from holding corporate positions again. Brenda walked out, first chin-high, eyes glassy. Ryan followed, not looking at me. I didn't stop him. Sometimes silence is the only lesson left. That night, I went home and poured myself a cup of coffee, not bourbon this time. The air in the house felt lighter, as if Eliana had finally exhaled somewhere above. On her desk still sat the photo of the two of us from our first delivery, run me in a borrowed truck, her with a clipboard grinning like we'd just conquered the world. I looked at it and said softly, "We made it, Ellie. You and me." A week later, I met Dr. Ann Wallace for the first time. Eliana's daughter. My stepdaughter by bloodline, though we'd never met until now. She carried herself the way Eliana used to, composed, sharp-eyed kind, but firm. When she spoke about continuing Eliana's legacy, it wasn't about profit or control. It was about purpose. Integrity delivers, she said, smiling at the company motto. That's not just business. It's how she lived. I nodded, and how she died protecting it. Now, as I walk through the company floors each morning, people still greet me with respect, but they look at Anne with something else hope. That's how I know Eliana's story isn't ending. It's just moving forward one generation later. I've learned something through all this. Revenge fades. Justice endures. And love, the kind built on truth, outlasts every betrayal. When I lock up the office at night, I still whisper her words to myself, the same ones she left on that note. Guard what we built, Danny. The wolves always come when the lights go out. This time I whisper back, they can come. The lights are staying on. Thank you for listening to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please like and subscribe if you haven't done so already. Also, leave a comment below to share your thoughts on what happened. Take care.